Joining us now from Brussels is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Hi, Ed. So, of course, we were just discussing this meeting. Give us a rundown of the president's day so far at this NATO summit.
Well, the president's on his way to address the European Council, which is part of the European Union. That is the third of the three big meetings he's holding here in this diplomatic capital of Europe, already having met with the members of NATO here at their headquarters, and then a meeting of the G7 leaders who are also members of NATO. The Prime Minister of Japan was also in town as part of those meetings with the G7, and there was a conversation between the President and the Japanese Prime Minister about today's missile launch by North Korea that is still being assessed by the U.S. and its Asian allies. So a lot of big diplomatic foreign policy issues on the agenda today for the President, who then returns here later to address reporters and take questions. Big headlines out of here today, essentially NATO vowing to continue to support Ukraine however necessary. The G7 countries announcing new sanctions on more than 300 Russian officials, mostly members of the Russian Duma or their parliament, plus more than 40 Russian defense companies. Again, going after things like yachts and real estate that are held in other parts of the world. Also plans now to make sure that the sanctions already announced aren't evaded by those that they're meant to target. Beyond that, the United States now announcing it plans to take in 100,000 Ukrainian refugees in the coming year, on top of the millions who've been displaced inside and outside of Ukraine. That would be in addition to refugee caps already put in place by the Biden administration, a signal of how serious they understand this humanitarian crisis now to be. $1 billion will be spent on those humanitarian plans. And then NATO announced plans for an $11 billion, actually it was the G7, forgive me, $11 billion fund over the next 5 years to deal with food insecurity concerns, not just in Europe, but also across the Middle East, North Africa, and other parts of the world that have relied on Ukraine for wheat. Many may not realize Ukraine is actually one of Europe's biggest agricultural exporters, and there's concerns about a widespread food crisis should it not be able to make its yield in the coming year and serve as the breadbasket to many other countries as it has for several decades.
A devastating impact there for sure. Ed, let's talk a little bit about Ukrainian President Zelensky and what he's asking for. He's appealing to NATO, asking for, quote, military assistance without restrictions. What does he want for Ukraine that he's not getting now? And do you expect that to change by the end of these meetings?
Not necessarily by the end of the meetings, but his message was essentially, you all need to work together and get us what we've been asking for, instead of us having to go to individual countries to ask for assistance. The problem or the frustration Ukrainian diplomats have expressed to us, and President Zelensky did today to the leaders, is that as a massive group of large countries, 30 member states across Europe and North America, the consensus and the bureaucracy that comes with big decisions about spending money or providing supplies is taking too long. And that he has had to go to individual countries to ask for quicker assistance, as he has with the United States, for example. And so what he was saying to NATO today is, hurry up and make up your mind. Let us know what you're sending. You aren't proving to skeptics and to the world that you are indeed the most superior military alliance there is, because you're not necessarily providing us with the support that we thought we'd be getting. And he says this as a non-member of this alliance who's wanted to be a part of it before. But notably in his speech today, there was no request for a no-fly zone. He and his government understand that's a naive request at this point, because so many of the countries have said to establish a no-fly zone is to potentially spark World War III. The other is that he did not once again renew his request to become a member of NATO, and instead spent so much time criticizing the alliance, among other things saying that it is yet to show what the alliance can do to save people, to show that this is truly the most powerful defense union in the world, and the world is waiting. In essence, the world is waiting for this collective body based here in Brussels to respond further to the crisis by providing more troops, more supplies, and more funding. And we should note, NATO announced it's sending 4 new combat battalions, deploying them across Eastern Europe to Romania, Slovakia, Hungary, another sign of the alliance preparing for the possibility that the military conflict expands beyond Ukraine's borders.
He wants action. Ed O'Keefe in Brussels on the ground for us. Thank you so much.